Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Christina Loren is one of those rare creative meetings in the mind that blend to completely original results, as Christina Hobbs and Lauren Billings discovered when they first began writing together nearly 15 years ago. Today ascending to among the most popular rom-com writing teams of the 2020s, even catching the praise of Business Insider, who noted of the wildly successful brand they built together that they're hugely popular amongst reviewers on Goodreads, the world's largest platform for readers to rate and review books, recommend new titles to friends, and participate in fun challenges. Their books have been nominated for 8 Goodreads Choice Awards. Among the best-selling catalog that earned those nominations, the team began their storied career with the Beautiful series, which launched way back in 2009 with Beautiful Bastard and spawned a cottage industry with hit sequels and novellas like Beautiful Bitch, Beautiful Stranger, Beautiful Bombshell, Beautiful Player, Beautiful Beginning, Beautiful Beloved, Beautiful Secret, Beautiful Boss, and Beautiful. And standalone bestsellers like The Unhoneymooners, The House, Love in Other Words, Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, my favorite half-night stand, The Soulmate Equation, Twice in a Blue Moon, In a Holidays, Roomies, Autobiography, Dating You Hating You, Sublime, The Honey Don't List, which made Oprah's romance novels we couldn't put down, and Something Wilder. They've appeared everywhere from the Romantic Times to Entertainment Weekly's top 10 romance lists. And in 2021 alone, experience highlights like making Barnes & Noble's Best Books of the Year list, She Reads Best Romance of the Year, Audible's Best of 2021, and BuzzFeed's Best Romance Novels, among many others. Christina and Loren are here today to talk about their charmed creative partnership. Thank you to both of you for being with us.
Hi, this is Christina Hobbs of Christina Loren on About the Authors TV.
Hi, this is Lauren Billings of Christina Loren on About the Authors TV.
Please acquaint viewers to both of your early exposures to authors growing up who influenced you as readers and writers.
And I grew up in very close to Berkeley, California. My parents were both psychologists, so we had a lot of psychology books on the shelves. My dad was a really big high fantasy and sci-fi reader. And my mom read a lot of literary fiction. So I think having a daughter who was obsessed with romance from the minute she could read was sort of a shock to them. I bought most of my books from the used bookstore with my allowance because my mom, she just, she loved me reading, but she wasn't going to go out and buy me Danielle Steele. And that's really what I wanted. So we had books everywhere. And I was the only real romance reader in the house, though. So in middle school, we all got to choose a volunteer job, and I chose the library every year. So I worked there, and it ended up being kind of a pain because it was like just filing books, which is super tedious, but I didn't care. I got most of my books I got for like a quarter or 50 cents at the used bookstore because Danielle Steele had like a million books. It felt like I could never catch up. So when people say like, who did you read? I feel like I just say her because she just kept me in books for so many years until I went to college. And then I didn't really have time for like reading for fun in that way anymore. So, yeah.
I grew up, my dad was in the military and I had a stay-at-home mom. And she was just a voracious reader of romance. We had our garage was full of bookcases of Harlequins and Barbara Cartland and all of those, but I was not allowed to read them. And so I would just take them. And I thought that I had this insane talent that I could just open the book to any page and I would be able to find the love scene. And then I would carefully place it back where it went. So that's sort of it. And I was like, we went to the library a ton as kids, because we couldn't really afford to buy books. And so I kind of grew up in the library. I just read, like at my school library, I just read everything, like just anything I could get my hands on. I remember I read like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe like 17 times.
Oh, yeah.
The Miracle Worker and, all of those things. And then when I would go to our like local library, I used to read like Mary Higgins Clark and like lots of mysteries and thrillers and stuff that we didn't have at my school library.
Let's talk about the wonderfully kindred connection you two first made working together on a piece of Twilight fan fiction online when you first met. And what was it about each other's writing style that appealed to you both?
So we were both writing fan fiction. This was in like 2008, 2009. And Lo was putting on a panel at San Diego Comic-Con. And she was I had sort of a popular story at the time. And so she had invited me to come and do it. And this was the first thing that I ever wrote, like for fun, was some Twilight fan fiction. And so she invited me out there to San Diego, and we met for the first time and just got along really well, and decided we were going to write a book together.
Yeah. I mean, the thing about fandom is it's so collaborative, and you do it for the joy of it. You don't do it thinking about how much work it's going to be. So, we wrote a little short story together after we met, and it was really fun. And then we were like, that was great. Let's write a book, kind of having no idea that writing a book is a really huge endeavor. It's very different to like plan out a book than to just like, be a pantser and write some fan fiction. So the first book that we ever finished together was actually a YA novel. It's still on the shelf. Like we've never published it because there was sort of the insanity of publishing Beautiful Bastard that followed pretty quickly. But I think it was nice that we didn't know what writing a book entailed, because I don't know that we would have tried it had somebody said like, you guys, this is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
It sounds like you two also had a winning backup plan when you were able to turn back to the original story Christina had first gotten noticed for with The Office that was thereafter reworked into what became your breakout bestseller, Beautiful Bastard.
Well, so The Office was Christina's fan fiction, and that was based only on like the character sort of physical descriptions from the Twilight film. And it really had nothing to do with the books. That's one of the wonderful things about fan fiction, is that you can take the characters from a movie. You can take just the names. You can take the actors who play them and put them in a completely random situation. We would have fan fictions that we loved that were like two baristas, meeting each other, or, they were on a cruise ship or something. It has nothing to do with the source material in many cases. And that was definitely true for The Office. So this story was originally Christina's. And like she said, it was the first thing she ever wrote. And what happened was, just like a sort of short summary about how we got here. The book that we first wrote together after fandom was actually not at all related to fan fiction. It was an original fiction YA story with totally new characters that were all our own. But around the time that we were writing together, the author who had written 50 Shades, that was also a fan fiction in the same community. And she published that book. And so as you know, it sold, billions of copies. And so publishers were looking for the next 50 Shades. And so they were obviously looking in the same fandom space that 50 Shades had been in. And 50 Shades had been a fan fiction called Master of the Universe. So what happened was, people were looking for the next story. The Office had predated 50 Shades in the fandom, and it had been a very big story, and it was written by Christina under a pen name. So Christina had taken it down offline. It was no longer online. And what that meant was anybody could take that story and submit it as their own. And that actually is what happened. It came across the desk of one of our friends who was in publishing, and that person gave Christina a heads up, like, this is weird, but I just saw The Office come across my desk. So we sort of panicked because we didn't want her story to be stolen and published as someone else's book. And so we had been writing some YA fiction at the time, but we decided to just edit The Office so that Christina could post it online, and that nobody could publish it under their name. But once we got into it, it got to be really fun. Like, it's a really fun story. It's really sexy. It's snarky. It's sort of over the top ridiculous. And we had a lot of fun editing it. So we kind of made it something new.
As you reshape this original concept together, please share a bit with fans about what the character development process for Chloe Mills and Bennett Ryan was like. For instance, who wrote in what character's voice?
Well, so when we first decided we were going to rework it, I was like, I don't even want to look at this thing. I haven't touched it in years. It's like very amateur, the first thing I ever wrote. So I had basically said, like, listen, Lo, if you want to take this and make it yours, do it. Just change it. Do whatever you want. I think the only thing that I really cared about is one of the good things about this original story. Like I said, when I was little, I used to think that I could like open a romance novel and I knew exactly where the love scene was going to be, because they always tend to be at like this 3/4, point. And one of the things that I had done was what if we always use this term called UST, which is like unresolved sexual tension. And, so like a lot of times when a couple has sex in a book, like kind of solves the problems. And so it was like, well, what if it happens at the very beginning and it doesn't solve or like ease the tension? It just makes it worse. And so that was really the only thing, is that we wanted to keep it so that it literally starts off with a bang. I think that they have sex in the first like 10 pages. And also that they're just sort of ridiculous. They're like two cartoon characters and it's just fun. There are things we would change now because that book came out in 2012 or 13, 2013. 2013. Yeah. So I wasn't precious about it at all. In fact, there were many things I wanted to take out that I was vetoed on because they're things that readers really loved.
We'd be remiss not to ask for your fans, who came up with the scene where Bennett confesses his love at the end of the book?
I think I did. I think because what happened was she had written, she had this whole book, but it was like twice as long. The fan fiction was about twice as long as the book is. So we cut off the second half and basically reworked the ending. So I think the way that it happens was in the draft that I did. But I mean, the thing with our books is no matter who writes a scene, it ends up being written by both of us because we edit it so extensively. So
I don't even remember how he tells her he loves her.
Because it's way back in the book list. Yeah.
As the creative back and forth continued, which of you then came up with the brilliant final title, Beautiful Bastard?
Actually, it was easy because in the book, in the original story, she calls him Beautiful Bastard.
Yeah.
That's her nickname for him. So, when we were changing it from The Office, which isn't a very like dynamic title for a romance, when we were changing it from The Office, The Beautiful Bastard was just like such an easy title to choose.
So your dream comes true when Simon Schuster picks up the book. Had you decided by then as a team what author name you were going to share and what ultimately became the collective pen name, Christina Loren?
Well, when we first talked about, what name we were going to use, it was our agent's name, I believe, that came up with Christina Loren. For one, some people don't want to read books that are written by co-authors because they think they're going to feel sort of disjointed. But also it's like they're shelved under one name, and we didn't want to do that. So it's kind of nice. Being Christina Loren gives us some distance. So it doesn't really matter, like neither of us are Christina Loren, and yet both of us are Christina Loren. And so we have actually been places before where somebody is talking about us and they don't know we're there and they're talking about Christina Loren, but it's like Christina Loren is this person who doesn't really exist. So I actually really like having that name. It really does give us a little bit of distance.
Now, how fast did word come back from the publisher they wanted more? As after this, you tided fans over with the novella, Beautiful Bitch, and then a second new full novel, Beautiful Stranger.
It was really interesting when we came, because we sold Beautiful Bastard and it was a 2-book deal. And they said that they wanted it to be in the same world, but they didn't need a sequel because we didn't want to have to break them up and then bring them back together. And so we had to, when we were editing Bastard, we kind of added in the potential for there to be a relationship for Sarah in the next book. And so then we chose Beautiful Stranger because it seemed like a good fit. But when I look back at how we came up with all this stuff, I don't feel like we were super mentally organized. It really was so chaotic to sell this. It was so exciting. It happened really fast. We sold the book. I think we got the offer like September 19th, 2012, and the book came out February 13th, 2013. Like it was super fast from when we sold it to when it came out because they wanted to get that book out really quickly. So we had a book deal September 19th and Beautiful Stranger was due December 15th. So we wrote that book in like 2 months and it was just this blur. I had little kids. We both had full-time jobs, but we were like, listen, we got to strike while the iron's hot. So I think a lot of the stuff we did, it was so serendipitous that it worked out as well as it did because it just happened so quickly. And like in 2013, we had 6 books out that year.
Well, you both certainly wrote quite prolifically in the run that followed with the novella Beautiful Bombshell, the third full novel Beautiful Player, new novellas Beautiful Beginning and Beautiful Beloved before another new novel Beautiful Secret. For viewers who might not have an appreciation of the difference between writing a novella and a novel, how did you use one to help set up the other, for instance?
Our first one, we didn't really know what we were doing yet. That would be Beautiful Bitch. And we were still trying to figure it out. But then I think once we got to the next one, we used those novellas as a way to introduce who was going to be the hero in the next book, in the next full novel. And they were just really fun. It's fun to write something in 30,000 words. And so like our editor at the time, Adam Wilson, like his favorite is Beautiful Bombshell. And he thought it was like the Beautifuls do like The Hangover, because it's in Vegas. So it took us like, I think it took us a book to really get into it. And then it was just really fun. It was such a good way to like, for at the end, the reader was like, oh, I really want to know more about Will. And you're like, well, you're in luck because Beautiful Player is coming out.
One of the instant draws for readers to this series have always been its co-stars. Whether we're talking about Sarah Dillon, or Max Stella, or Henry, or Hannah Bergstrom, or Ruby Miller, or Niall Stella, or Pippa Bay Cox, or Jensen Bergstrom, or Will Sumner. The two of you shape the books around your dialogue, as you have a very unusual outlining process to begin with.
I think sometimes outlining the dialogue first is good because those are the things that feel really important. They're like the points you have to hit. And so if you know what they are immediately, it makes it really easy to build the chapter around it. And then as we're reading, like as we're working on it, if you read it out loud, a lot of times you'll go like, oh, people don't talk like that. That's like not a thing that people say. But yeah, so sometimes when you look at our outlines, it will just be like, they do this, da, 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 and then it will just be a section of like a conversation because that part is just so clear to us. And usually those are the parts that always stay, that don't get edited out in the process.
Yeah. And romance is hard to write. I mean, it's one of the only genres where you know the ending, you know? Yep. So a reader starts on page 1 and they know how the book's going to end, and you have to keep them engaged the whole time anyway. Dialogue is really fun to write. And sometimes when we're outlining, we'll outline the dialogue of a chapter and then we can build the story around that because relationships, romance is about the relationship, right? And so you watch the couple fall in love through how they interact, not necessarily how all of their internal monologue is going. So you really need to see them fall in love on the page. And a lot of times the way they do that is by what they say to each other, whether they're like being honest with each other or they're holding things back. And so it's really fun for us to write the dialogue. And I think especially for the Beautiful series, that was some of the most fun we've ever had, just because, you know, the characters are they're so extreme in their archetypes. Like Bennett is such an a-hole, you know, he is such a bastard. And like having the freedom to write him without worrying about whether people would like him was really fun because you can make him truly terrible and then you redeem him. So he was one of my favorite characters to write. To this day, I love writing Bennett because he's just like, it's almost like finding the worst side of yourself that you love anyway, and just like putting it on a page. But I think it was really fun for us to play with these different archetypes. Like Niall Stella is this really buttoned up, proper British guy. And he was also just lovely. So he and Bennett are totally different, but they were just as much fun to write.
I really loved Beautiful Player was a lot of fun. Hannah is just this kind of like derpy, dorky, naive scientist. And Will is this like player because his book is Beautiful Player. Is also a scientist. And that book was a lot of fun. It was not fun in the beginning. I remember very specifically calling Lo, crying that I didn't know what I was doing and stuff. But that book ended up being really fun.
By the time we arrive at the final novella and novel in the series, Beautiful Boss and Beautiful, you'd pulled off 2 neat tricks. 1, making office culture sexy for a series. And 2, getting a reverse trend and tradition going, where moms were pulling your books off their daughters' shelves versus the other way around. Were these characters and series hard to say goodbye to?
It was hard to finish because, you know, when you spend that much time with characters, you really feel like they're real. And you start to wonder and like, you know, when you're writing a book, like Beautiful is the last novel, there's 5 novels and 5 novellas. And in the last novel, Beautiful, you get to see what everyone is up to. And it was nice being able to check in on them with every subsequent book. And so once we finished Beautiful, we gave all of the characters, all the couples, their own epilogue. That was really lovely. And it was sort of like our parting shot. But yeah, sometimes I miss them. And we do get readers asking what they might be up to. But I will say, you know, when you write a series that is that long, and especially in romance where readers have a favorite couple and they want to see them in every book, it becomes really unwieldy. It's a really big cast to write. And if you have scenes where they're all together, it's just really hard to toggle the dialogue with, 10 different characters, right? It's hard to do that and really make it read smoothly. So I think by the end, we felt like the world was just getting a little too big for contemporary romance. But yeah, I think about them a lot. That was a really fun series to write.
HarlequinJunkie.com would offer a moving memorial to the series as the curtains closed, with a review that beautiful was everything I hoped it would be, with many memorable scenes and so much love. I still hate saying goodbye to these characters who become like friends over the past couple of years, but Christina Loren gave them a worthy send-off. I can only imagine what they have planned for us devoted fans of their writing in the near future. In that spirit, when you two sat down to do just that, was it a feeling of, okay, we're free, we don't have to recur the same characters or theme anymore? And was the vision all along to then transition into standalone novels like Dating You, Hating You?
Our first standalone was Dating You, Hating You. And we had an idea. That one I think was tricky because it was like our first book that had like more plot in it. And so by nature of having more plot, you have there's been less time in the bedroom, which is like both easier and harder. And it was such a bridge book for us. Like we could not do the books we're doing now, like Unhoneymooners and Soulmate Equation and stuff, if we would not have done Dating You, Hating You. We love that book. That's like one of our favorite books. And we did so much research. So for people that don't know, it's about like two like they work at oh my God, I'm having a brain cramp. They look at like ad agencies for like movies. They're like
they're talent agents.
Talent agents. And they have like this meet cute and they really like each other. And then they show up Monday morning, they find out that their two companies have merged and there's only one. They only need one agent. And she has been there longer. She is far more experienced and frankly just better. But he's sort of the kind of like it guy. Everybody just loves him. And it was sort of our like little like ode to 9 to 5. And it was like easier to write a standalone because you get to come in fresh. You don't have any baggage you're pulling in, but sometimes it is really nice to like fall back on those characters, the secondary characters, and pull them in that world and stuff. But I really like writing standalones. I'm sure we'll write another series at one point, but I really like it. I like that fresh start every time you go in.
With the Unhoneymooners, how much fun was it to write against a wedding backdrop? There must have been a zillion potential twists and turns sitting there, just within the natural chaos of a wedding day alone, to play with on the page with twins Olive and Amy and the other members of the wedding party and the guests.
The Unhoneymooners was so much fun to write because Olive's family is the most loving, warm, chaotic, hilarious group that they just blew off the pages for us. Like as soon as we sat down to write it, it was almost like we didn't have to plan out these different character types. They were just right there so quickly. And I think that's one of the things that's really fun about writing weddings is everybody can relate to family complications and dynamics. And everybody can relate to the sort of pressure of a single day and everything going right. And then you can imagine that the worst possible thing would be for everyone in your wedding to get horrible, violent food poisoning. So like there was, even though it sounds terrible, it was really fun to play with that because it's just a funny premise. And then you add into it that Olive is the twin of the bride and she's the unlucky twin. There was just so much content there to play with. And I think that's one of the things for writing romance that anyone out there who is trying to do it, just make sure you put enough in your books, enough roadblocks, enough character complexities, enough hurdles and stumbles and flaws that you really have enough meat to play with, because Olive is such a meaty character in that way. It's so fun to watch her fall in love because she fights it so hard.
Now, you two drifted into a little bit of a literary departure from previous outings in the house, which revolves around a horror story of sorts. Who came to whom with that concept? And what gave you the greatest thrill about putting your own spin on the horror genre?
Well, I think actually the house was a conversation that we had because my kids were younger and you really loved the movie Monster House.
Yes.
And I really loved Edward Scissorhands, but we were romance writers. And we were like, how can we bring in this love for like the paranormal and haunted houses and like creepy kids and stuff, but make it romance? And I think, looking back, I'm like, how did we ever write that book? We would never think to do that now. But I'm so grateful that we, just did this sort of wild, different things. I really love that book. I think that book is a lot of fun.
The Romantic Times would declare after reading your next bestseller, Love in Other Words, that it was impossible to put down. After years by this point becoming masters at writing the couple dynamic set against pretty much any backdrop you wish, please take Macy Sorensen and Elliot Petropoulos as a special example, if you would, of that process in action, especially writing between alternating timelines.
Well, they're fun because they're childhood friends. So they meet like when they're 13 and they have this whole history together. And then there's a gap in time where they don't see each other for about 10 years. And so we open the book with them running into each other after all this time has passed. And so I think that whenever you give yourself a chance for there to be unfinished business that they have to figure out, but they have other hurdles in the way, it's really fun. That's the reason we were smiling, is because Macy and Elliot are like fan favorites. Like we have a lot of people who are really in love with them right now. And it's just like, it's really fun to see.
What kind of word games do you two go through coming up with these clever titles like Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating? And my favorite, Half Night Stand, is another fun example.
Yeah, so we sort of had a little bit of a formula that we would do for titles early on that was sort of like a play on a phrase. And so instead of it being, our guide to dating, it was our guide to not dating. Instead of being my favorite one night stand, it was a half night stand, which I remember we were doing that. We were like going through Urban Dictionary and like looking up because half night stand is like internet dating and stuff. And so one of the terms on there is like a half night stand is when you sneak out like halfway through the night. And so sometimes we hate titles. Unhoneymooners, we knew that title before we even started writing. Something Wilder that comes out in May, that book has had a million titles.
I still have friends who call it the wrong thing because we had one title for a while and then it changed. We had like cover drafts with a different title on it.
Yeah, it was originally like Outlaw Summer or
Wild I don't even Summer. Know. It was Wild Summer.
And I still will sometimes say Wild Summer. But like our book that another book we're going to write this year, we will have like a working title, but we already have like the title for it. Like I think Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating, I think at one point we were calling it like Besties or something. So sometimes the title is just really there. And we sometimes feel like that's like a good sign when it's right there. And we always want the title to tell you a little bit about the book, because sometimes, it's the ever after of the unbecoming sky, something. And I'm just like, what does that mean? The other side of yellow or...
Finding a soulmate through DNA. This is the thing right now, from tracing a family tree to catching serial killers like the Golden State Killer. With the Soulmate Equation, what made you two decide to apply this science to finding love?
So Soulmate Equation came about from a couple of things. One, I had read Bad Blood by John Carreyrou because I was really fascinated with the Theranos scandal. And I just love the idea of like a small company that has so much excitement and buzz and money behind it and all of the things that can go right and all the things that can go wrong. And then we also, Christina and I had done the 23andMe DNA testing, and we kept getting all these emails that were like, you are 70% more likely to taste soap when you eat cilantro, and you are 80% more likely than most people to have thick hair follicles, and just all these random things that we're like, well, if you can know like what I'm going to smell in certain situations, but like, can you figure out who would be a good match for me in a romantic partner, and so I'm a scientist by training. And so I had a lot of fun with Christina, like sitting down and talking about like, well, what would this company need to look like if we're going to do DNA matchmaking? Like, what would it have to have proven, both in terms of like personality assessments and what kinds of scientific tests would they have had to do? And like people who've just met and people who've been married for decades. And it was just fun. It was fun to build it because like in reality, doing that kind of a company would take decades, right? But in fiction, you can write it in a page. And so it was like a really fun, thought experiment.
Writing the lovers meet again romance that you do between Sam and Tate and Twice in a Blue Moon, what are some of the classic elements of a love story like this that you recommend aspiring authors include to make sure they're hitting the right traditional beats with readers of that genre?
The great thing about like a second chance romance is like, what did they mess up before? And is it still a problem? And can they overcome it? Like I was reading a book the other day that was like a second chance romance, but they didn't tell us why they broke up the first time. And you can't do that. I have to know, because I have to know what lessons they've learned. Are they the same people? Like, are they making the same mistakes? Are they even aware of these mistakes? And so, yeah, you have to have all that in Twice in a Blue Moon. There's like a betrayal that we don't find out, until a little bit later. And so that was really fun, was writing this thing that happens that she's sort of been carrying around and is angry about. And can you do the wrong thing for the right reasons? Is that, forgivable?
Do you two have an opinion on whether the big reveal needs to always come at the end, or is it sometimes smarter to place it strategically earlier in a story like this one?
That's a really good question, because I think, with thrillers and different suspense books, like, you're not going to find out the twist until the end. Romance, that they're going to end up together, and our readers definitely want, that's the only contract we have between author and reader in the romance genre, right? That is like understood, that there will be a happily ever after, but how you get there is what varies. And so I love it when there's a twist that explains why they've been apart. Like, I know a lot of people who've read Love and Other Words are really surprised by the twist, because they think it's going to be one thing, and then they realize that wasn't what happened, or it wasn't the only thing that happened. But I think it just depends on the story. Sometimes you do want to know right away why they split apart, what the obstacle is, what the conflict is. And what's interesting about the read is watching them like navigate that and come back together at the end. But I love it when a romance surprises me, 3/4 of the way through, because they are, at best, they are absorbing and voicey and fun and like riotous. And at worst, they can be formulaic. And so when you can break out of that formula, it's really fun.
And keeping a secret from the reader is tricky, because you have to make sure that you're not like deceiving them in some ways. So we had a book called Sweet Filthy Boy that we started. Ansel, the hero, is keeping a secret, but he's keeping it from Mia and the reader. And we were writing it originally in both points of view. And at some point we realized we can't do this. Like, he can't be in this and not telling the reader what this reveal is. And we had to rewrite it. So you have to be really careful about like what you give, when you give it, and who's telling the story.
I see behind one of you there's a framed cover of In a Holidays, and you had a pretty original spin on the Christmas theme within the romantic comedy story you told here.
We had just watched the movie Happy Death Day, which I don't know if you've ever seen. It's really fun. It's basically about a woman who, it's her birthday, and she wakes up in the morning, and she like keeps living the same day over and over again. And at the end of the day, she gets murdered. And the next morning she wakes, she like gets murdered, and then she gasps awake, and it's the morning again. And so she's trying to figure out who's killing her. And we just love
genius.
That.
It really is
so funny, and it's so smart. And we thought, how fun would it be to do a rom-com that's not Groundhog Day, but has that same element of like, what is going on? And we knew this was a couple of years before In a Holidays came out. We knew that we were going to have an October 2020 book release. And we were like, this is actually perfect for a holiday book. And the wonderful thing about writing a holiday book is that is sort of the only time of year in contemporary romance where you can get away with a little bit of magic, where people believe that there can be like, magical elements in a contemporary story. And so we just had a lot of fun writing this sort of do-over. And it took us we probably had 3 full drafts of that book before we got it right. Because it was
time
really
travel's
tricky.
hard.
Time travel is really hard. But yeah, that one was really fun. That was all us. I'm sure our at some point our publisher was like, is this going to work? But it totally did. That book did great.
Autobiography was a very timely book given the ever-expanding reading audience you two catered to in the 2020s. Was this a group brainstorm or something one of you originally brought to the other as an idea?
Autobiography, when people ask us, like, what's your favorite book? We're always like, well, we don't really have a favorite. That's like asking you to pick your kids, but Autobiography is the book of our heart. It is about Tanner, who is a high school senior who has been moved from the Bay Area where he was out to Provo, Utah, where he is sort of put back in the closet. And he falls in love with Sebastian, who is the son of the Mormon bishop of their area, and who has written a story. In the book, they take part in a class, Tanner does, because Sebastian's a year older, where you write a book in a semester. And Sebastian was in this class the year before, and his book is actually being published. Lo is from the Bay Area. She came out to her parents as bi when she was young, and her parents are Berkeley and very open and accepting. And, I live in Utah, home of the Mormons, and I worked in a school, and kids, whether they know that they are gay or not, since they are like drawn to those people that are going to be a safe space. And so I tended to be that safe space. And so kids would come to me and talk to me. And I never got to see their sort of like ending, their happy ending, because they would go on to high school. So that's sort of what this book was for us, is all those kids.
What has it meant to you that readers have grown up with your books on their bedroom bookshelves as a comfort zone or an escape, or even a way to process what they go through across the adolescent spectrum growing up, and that they've wound up in school curriculums? It's got to be pretty amazing for any author to see their books filter into the pop culture as an influence with real resonance.
It's been really amazing with Autobiography, because that book is when we get more letters about than anything else. I mean, we don't just get DMs that are like, loved it, thank you so much. We get like long DMs telling us their whole story and how their family isn't supportive, or they've struggled in this way, and how this book means something to them. And I mean, we can't put into words what that means. That's the entire reason we wrote the book. And so those letters mean everything to us. And it is a different sort of responsibility when you're writing for teens than when you're writing romance that are meant to be, beach reads and vacation reads. Like, that is a different type of project for us. So it's been really special. And I think if we did another YA book, it would take the same amount of thought, because you do have a responsibility when you're writing for young people.
Turning to one of Oprah's romance novels we couldn't put down, The Honey Don't List. Please tell us about writing this recent hit.
So The Honey Don't List was, that book came out in the pandemic, which was obviously, it was like, we were supposed to go on book tour for that. And we got it, I think it was canceled maybe like a week or two before.
Yeah, it came out like March 15th, and everything closed like the 13th or something.
Yeah, it was nuts. But that one is really great. It's about these two people who are basically assistants to talent, to these big, home improvement channel stars, and kind of navigating working in a toxic work environment and falling for each other. But I think there's an underlying theme of like how to give and accept help and love. And I think, what the heroine in that book has a movement disorder, which is the same movement disorder that my father had and my sister has. And so it was really special writing about somebody who struggles with a movement disorder called dystonia. And it's not a book about dystonia. It's just a piece of who this character is. But I really love the thread of how James, the hero, like sort of quietly supports her without question. And Carrie, the heroine, how she comes to realize her own value as an employee, and like how good she is at what she does, and how so much of her boss's success is due to her own work. It's sort of about unsung heroes in the background.
Something Wilder takes readers on a pretty wild adventure, and it's a little outside the box from past settings and plotting. How much fun is it for you two to explore new creative territory in a book like this one as you're weaving a new romance throughout it?
Something Wilder comes out in May, and it is our sort of like ode to romancing the stone and Indiana Jones and National Treasure. And it just came at a time where we were stuck at home and did not want to write a book that took place in an office or a house or anything inside. And we had this idea for a while about this person who takes people on fake treasure hunts and then realizes that the treasure hunt is maybe not so fake. And so that's what this is. Lily Wilder, like, Joan Wilder from Romancing the Stone, uses her father's treasure maps that he left her. His like notebook with all of this information about sort of the Red Rock area of Utah, Canyonlands National Park and stuff, to because he was obsessed with treasure his whole life, to take tourists on these fake old timey treasure hunts. And it's a second chance romance because she is getting ready to do what she hopes is her very last one. And this man who is the love of her life, but who sort of left her 10 years ago, shows up. And it is about like Butch Cassidy's treasure and a little bit of the Wild West and adventure and adrenaline and kissing and car chases. And it was just the most fun thing we have ever written together.
We understand there's a spin-off of sorts of the Soulmate Equation that's also coming soon.
So right now we're working on, so if anyone who has read the Soulmate Equation, there's a side character in that book named Fizzy, and she's a blast. And so we're writing Fizzy's book. And one of the things that I have loved about it is, so when we were promoting the Soulmate Equation, we had every single event we did for the Soulmate Equation, somebody would ask us, are we going to get a book for Fizzy? We were asked that 100% of the time. And we weren't initially planning on writing it, but she just had so many people asking for it. And then we just got a really great idea that fit perfectly. So we are working on Fizzy's book. We're about to turn that in. And then, we'll see what comes next.
With this partnership now in its second decade, behind the hit brand Christina Loren, it must be fun to have each other to lean on professionally and personally as you navigate the crazy business of being a best-selling author team together.
We sort of say that like being a co-author is like our superpower because, the things that like one of us struggles with, the other one is really good at, but also being a writer is super solitary. You write alone, you go to signings alone, you have to deal with the happy stuff and the hard stuff alone. And we just always have someone there to talk about it with and who always knows exactly, how we feel. But we also spend as much time on our friendship as we do our working relationship. And so our friendship has grown right along with our working relationship. When we first started writing together, Lo had just, like, she was pregnant with her youngest, and now she's 12. And so seeing all of this sort of like grow has just been crazy. Sometimes it feels like it's been 12 years and sometimes it feels like it's been 2.
I know. You have somebody who's exactly on the same page as you are. We're excited about the same things. We're worried about the same things. You have somebody you can talk to at any minute of any day, and they are just as invested. And I think, when we became friends in 2009, we sort of, I don't know, at least initially, like, had this unspoken agreement that we were going to put just as much effort into the friendship as we were into the partnership. And so that has served us really well because we have time where we are Christina Lauren and we're working. We put on our working brains. And then there's times where we're just like being dumb together. Like we just spent the last 2 weekends together in Las Vegas going to concerts, and so we play hard and we work hard. And I think that sort of the fun that we have together shows in our books.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. And it sounds like the two of you always have a new idea between one or the other of you to keep fingers typing away. Any other creative ambitions you both look forward to bringing to fruition on the page in the future?
We had an idea for a book that's like Sexy Clue. So it's like the movie Clue, but like a romance, a rom-com. And when we actually got about halfway into drafting it, and it was really hard, and we're like, does this not exist because it's hard or because nobody has done it yet? And so I think that's on our bucket list. We want to write Sexy Clue. We want to write a romance that is like a murder mystery and comedy and a successful romance as well. And I think it's going to be tricky, but we're going to do it.
What about your approach to and advice for today's writers on writing a hip love scene that today's crowd wants to read? What's too much, what's too little, and what's just right?
Number one, you have to read romance and love romance. You have to read a lot, not just your genre, but outside of it. I think for just writing romance, I think romance is social change happens in romance. Like who people fall in love with, what the people look like who fall in love, like that is like social change is just happening so quickly in romance. And so you have to be on that. The books coming out now do not read like the books coming out 10 years ago. Even we said we would rewrite Beautiful Bastard if it came out now, because consent is a huge thing. Diversity is a huge thing. So you just have to stay current on what's happening, and you have to read a lot and read, really widely, and have a relationship with other writers and peers and stuff. We tell everybody that if you're going to write a book, there shouldn't really be competition between writers, because a rising tide lifts all boats. Like, books are not like cars. People do not buy just one. If you write a book and it's amazing, people are going to go, I want more of that.
Mhm.
And so probably that.
In closing, what sage words do you both have for aspiring romance authors on how to be original enough to break through while respecting those traditional pillars of the genre legacy readers might expect to see? It sounds like a delicate balance.
Anyone wanting to write romance nowadays, like Christina said, you need to read voraciously, but also I think you need to be fearless. There's a lot of people who come into romance thinking, I want to write my take on the hating game. I want to write my take on this very established property, the love hypothesis, right? And that's not going to get you a big following. You need to write your own take on whatever the story is that's just knocking at your cranium saying, let me out. And I think a lot of people are trying to play it too safe and write stories that they think fit into the genre instead of helping us expand the genre. So I would love to see more people coming in and just taking really huge swings, doing things that are wacky. I mean, Sally Thorne, who wrote The Hating Game, she has this book coming out that's called Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match. And it's Frankenstein's fictional sister making herself a husband in the morgue. And it's like wacky and wild, and it's so fun. And that's the kind of stuff I think romance needs more of, is those big swings, those crazy ideas, fearlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Christina and Lauren, we've had a wonderful time talking to you both today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Thank
Jake. It was nice to meet
you.
you.